It's without a doubt that Persona 3's themes have had a major impact on players all around the world. Just the way it explores memento mori, Latin for remember your mortality, makes for one of the most unique and memorable experiences out there. Now, it's been a hot minute since I've done any Persona 3 focused content here, so I'm back with part 1 of a 2-part series of analyses on the game. The second part has to do with the answer, but before I could talk about that, I found I needed to talk about an underrated aspect of P3's narrative first. One that's rarely discussed even though the concept is so entrenched in Japanese culture, and that has to do with apathy and the common Japanese saying, Shikata ga nai. So like, the main insidious disease affecting Tatsumi Island all throughout P3 is called Apathy Syndrome, right? It may come across as some exaggerated, fantastical version of depression or cynicism towards life, but I think it parallels modern Japan's issues, like the aftermath of the lost decade, more significantly than you might think. You see, shikata ga nai, or informally, shou ga nai, is a phrase that essentially translates to, it can't be helped. Trust me, I've heard my mom, who was born and raised in Japan, say this very often while I was growing up. It's similar to other Western phrases like shit happens, or the French c'est la vie, or such as life. But when this concept is combined with the collectivist philosophy of Confucianism, or i.e. the main influence of most of Eastern Asia, it oftentimes takes on a more fatalistic flavor, especially when viewed via a Western lens. Japan prides itself on stoic perseverance and resilience, which is further highlighted in another common Japanese phrase, gaman, which quite literally translates to perseverance, though it's generally understood as endure the impossible. On one hand, this shikata ga nai and gaman mentality can be quite admirable, and even promote the philosophy of mindfulness, or basically, don't lose sleep stressing over things that are outside of your control. Instead, focus on the things you can change, and place your effort into your attitude towards the hand you've been dealt. But this kind of mentality can become a double-edged sword, one that leads to complacency, and in collectivist Japan, a feeling that your fate is deserved. Now, everyone suffers from periods of low mood sometimes, so it doesn't mean we all have clinical depression, but I think there's a lingering misconception about how it has to be some strong emotion, some deep sorrow or sadness, when the reality is that it more often manifests as simple disinterest towards everything, aka apathy. We'll explore that topic more once we get to the Hikikomori part of this video, but first we got to talk about what constituted Japan's economic problems in the 90s, and how this still connects to P3, even though it was released in 2006. The early 2000s were still stuck in the aftermath of the lost decade, a time of severe economic recession in the 90s after the asset bubble crashed in Japan, resulting in huge hiring freezes and a steady uptick of hikikomori and mental health difficulties for young adults, especially those graduating college at the time. Now, to really understand how much the aftermath of the 90s affected a whole generation of young Japanese, to the extent that a sizable chunk was locked out of any stable career prospect for the rest of their lives, we need to discuss a unique hiring practice called Shuukatsu. This quite literally translates to job hunting, which might sound innocuous at first, but let me tell you, it's really quite unlike anything else in the developed world. Oh, and just like in my P5 analyses, by the way, I've included sources in the description below. So firstly, Japanese firms have always valued the lifelong employee model, and have prioritized hiring recent college graduates over anyone else in the labor market. This preference has been the standard since the 60s and is honestly still going quite strong today. When there aren't hiring freezes in place, that is. Shuukatsu is essentially the most important part of college for Japanese students. It takes up the entirety of senior year, and many even get started early in their junior year. Everyone acknowledges this process as important, so even professors will overlook students missing classes while they prioritize their Shuukatsu. The images and footage that I've included here are just small examples of this crazy Shuukatsu industry. Yes, I'll call it that, since everyone taking part in it also has to buy the same standard black suit and bag as depicted in this ad. Anyone who doesn't dress like this will most definitely stand out, which is seen as a bad thing in a society which places so much value on conformity. This leads me to another unique aspect of this Japanese hiring practice, which is how companies aren't so much looking to fill particular positions as they are simply looking to bring on employees for the long run. In contrast, it's been much more common in the Western world for workers to move on and renegotiate a better contract with a different company every handful of years, meaning an individual's unique skill set means a lot more and goes a lot further than it does in Japan, where it's common practice for a single company to just shuffle their employees from department to department every few years. This is supposedly in order to combat any one department from stagnating, according to the firms at least. And in general, accepting these transfers is especially important for promotions and career advancement. So you see, university is generally a time of relaxation for students, a time of respite between the hard work in high school to get into the best college possible and the rest of their lives working. Don't worry, we'll talk about the huge OT or karoshi culture in the P5 video you can find in the cards once it's done. But to reiterate, the main goal of university in Japan is to have an in or connection to a major firm's Shuukatsu period. It's common for students to receive an informal offer from a company as early as their junior year, which will later become formal offers within the last 6 months of a student's senior year, meaning many already have a promise of employment before they've even officially graduated. Anyway, I know we covered a lot, but I think all were necessary context to understand how easy it is for graduates to fall through the cracks if they're unable to secure a spot with a firm during Shuukatsu. I mean, even after realizing in recent years how unsustainable this hiring practice has been for the entire economy, most Japanese firms still prioritize it. But what did this mean in particular for the lost decade? Well, the growing 80-50 problem highlights where so many of them are at now. This term refers to parents who are now entering their 80s who are still providing for their almost 50-year-old children living at home. Of these Hikikomori, many initially became more reclusive when they couldn't find anything but part-time work during the 90s and early 2000s. Back in 2019, experts estimated that there are actually over 2 million total Hikikomori in Japan, with 600,000 of them in their middle age of 40 and 50. Now, there are of course those who socially withdraw all over the world, but why is this Hikikomori issue so prevalent in Japan? Well, this definitely seems to stem from the shame culture of Eastern Asia. You see, because collectivist and Confucianist values are melded together in Japan, the result is a society that places great emphasis on duty and obligation. A person has to uphold societal expectations and can't stick out, or else the entire weight of society's disdain will fall on them. They will be shamed, and shame is something that can never be removed unless a person does what society expects them to. This is different from most Western cultures that are based on guilt, which can be absolved through confession, self-righteousness, and other actions based around the individual themselves. So, where am I going with this? Well, many young Japanese who couldn't find work or were stuck in part-time employment slowly teetered towards the Hikikomori lifestyle. When your days begin to blur together to the point where you can't tell one from the rest. When you no longer find any enjoyment in the things you do while you trap yourself at home. When there have been no prospects for you, and the longer you've been shut away, the more you've come to believe you're a disgrace. That actually, yes, you deserve this worthless life because you yourself are worthless, even though the actual reality is that the huge hiring freeze was outside of your control and an unfortunate circumstance of the decade you graduated in. That there shouldn't be any shame in this. And yet, there is, because of the societal obligations that have been beaten into you by society. Now, this is not to say that some Western nations, especially America with our Protestant work ethic, don't have some semblance of this stigma as well. It's just not as oppressive or stifling, I believe, as it is in a collectivist society. So, going back to the Japanese who fell on hard times then and are still struggling now, if your present is already screwed, how can you not be at least somewhat anxious, if not fearful, of your future? It's easy, I believe, to adopt this mentality of shoganai, it is what it is, and it'll never change, therefore what's even the point in living? In relation to P3 in-game, I find it interesting that it's more so the adults who seem susceptible to apathy syndrome. But it's fitting, right? That these people are now in their late 20s and 30s after being locked out of traditional employment in the 90s, and their older parents who worry about their children's futures. I also can't help but think that those developing P3 must have known at least someone who was greatly affected by this period of economic stagnation. Kinda like how most of us knew at least one family, if not our very own, that was deeply affected by the 2008 recession. On a related note, China is teetering on a similar bubble at this very moment as Japan was then, except they barely have any social safety net. The entire economy is tanking, so it's no surprise to me that there is a growing movement of Bai Lan, or let it rot, among young Chinese, given that unemployment is at nearly 20% for those between 16 and 24. And remember, those are CCP numbers! But yeah, basically what Bai Lan conveys is that nothing will change, and therefore, I give up on having any real dreams or goals. Sounds an awful lot like the fatalistic perspective of Shikata and Apathy Syndrome, no? So I know I painted a very bleak picture throughout this video, but I'd say that these very hardships are exactly why Persona 3's message is so powerful. And a universal one at that, even if I did hyper-focus on Japanese culture here, since everyone around the world will encounter their own adversity at some point. Even so, there are still things that make life worth living. Nevertheless, I want to end on an uplifting note about shoganai. For my grandfather's generation, this mentality helped give the Japanese American community strength during and after their unjust internment during World War II. And as for me personally, it's been integral, along with my spirituality, in helping me focus on the new doors that have opened for me / what I can still do in spite of my chronic illness, instead of on all that I can't. I also really recommend reading that Bloomberg article on the middle-aged Hikikomori in its entirety. You don't have to pay, just simply create an account. A number of Hikikomori have found each other and have created support/peer groups to slowly eke out of social isolation together. And even though COVID had put some things on hiatus for them, nevertheless there are a number of hopeful stories. But otherwise, this about covers part 1 in this 2-parter series. Next time, I'll be dissecting how this apathy mentality carries over to the answer, and what, in turn, makes its narrative such a powerful depiction of how people cope with grief and loss. It'll be linked in the cards above once it's done. Anyway, please like and subscribe if you liked this video, and come join our welcoming Discord community at discord.gg/LadyVirgilia. Follow me on Twitter and on Twitch if you wish, and also check out my Genshin lore channel. Save on Rogue Energy products with my code LadyV, and lastly, I want to thank all my wonderful patrons for their support, especially Jared Breland, Andreas Hansen, Captain Hobo, Big Clingy, Sam Bezjak, Francesco Santoyo Rego, Silverwind847, M. Meownalin, Gigi Sora, Platinum Rose, Malcolm Lowry, Killer Ninja 151, Melanie Gutierrez, Unholy Biscuit, Leviathan 8685, Eden Corsef, and Scarmillion. Thanks for watching, guys.